We play and call it work.
Hey folks, Janene from MiniWarGaming here with another how-to video for ya. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do some paint chipping on this Flesh Tearers Baal Predator. If you have suggestions for anything you'd like to see in future how-to videos, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. So we're going to start with Abaddon Black. I'm going to mix a little bit of Lamian Medium into it. I just put the end of my brush in the pot and put a drop or two in my paint and mix it up. Now this next step I'm going to use kind of a dry brushing technique, but it's not a traditional dry brush. My brush itself is dry, but I'm using the end of it as kind of a stippling tool. A lot of people use a sponge or a little piece of blister foam for this part, and that works just fine. I'm using a brush just to get a little bit more control. And the reason why I'm keeping it dry is because I don't want the bristles to form into a nice clean tip. I want the end to be a little bit frayed, and that's going to act like the sponge would and give me a jagged kind of natural pattern on the edge. You can see me, I'm just dabbing this straight down. I'm not really concerned about making sure that it's even. I want it to have really kind of jagged lines and natural textures. I'm also doing this on the black as well as on the red because the black is highlighted, so it's no longer actually black anymore. I'm going to be sticking mostly to the edges of the tank, though I am going to do a few sections on this flat area. And one thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is that there are a billion of ways to do weathering and to do battle damage. This is just one. I don't really think that there's particularly a right way. I just think that there's a way that works for you and that gets the results that you like. I'm going to make sure that I get all of the magnetized pieces of the tank as well. I'm going to try and be mindful of how the tank will look once it's put together, so I don't spend too much time painting areas that are going to be covered once it's entirely assembled. And it's not bad to put weathering in places that you're not going to see all the time, but you want to make sure you're not wasting too much effort on areas that only you will appreciate. After I've got the stippling step done with my dry brush, I'm going to take my detail brush and I'm going to paint a few more smaller areas. I'm going to elongate some of the edges as if they've torn a little bit. I'm also going to be dabbing it to make a few smaller chips that I couldn't create with the larger brush. You gotta be careful when you're trying to perfect this work with your detail brush because you can really destroy your natural patterns if you fiddle with it too much. Sometimes there's beauty in the imperfection. I really want to make sure that I beat up this script area because I don't want this tank to be too fancy for the Flesh Tearers. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take lead belcher and I'm going to start creating silver paint chips inside of the areas that I've blocked out in black. Now I'm not doing this with a dry brush anymore. My brush is wet, but I'm still using the same kind of technique. I'm dabbing my brush, I'm not necessarily painting it. I don't want to create straight lines. I want there to be awkward overlapping shapes, and I'm not really concerned with making sure that I stay inside the black in a regular pattern either. I don't want there to be a regular outline around the entire shape. If there's some areas where the black shows a lot, that's fine, and if there's some areas where the silver goes outside the black, that's fine as well. If you feel like your shapes are becoming too regular and not natural, one trick that you can do is you can actually dab with your brush and then take the tank and flip it over to another angle and dab again. Just the matter of turning the angle at which you're painting can sometimes help break up the regular pattern. Now I'm a sucker for battle damage. I like it a lot. So this is going to be light battle damage for me, but after looking at the tank I realized that that may not be light battle damage for other people. But I don't want to go too overboard because I do have a lot of different elements going on this tank and I want it to kind of blend together. I don't want it to look too busy. Alright, here's the tank after the first paint chips are on there. We're going to give this 2 more layers of highlights to really kind of break up the regular color of the silver. The first highlight we're going to do is Runefang Steel. I'm going to be using this color in a very similar way to the lead belcher. I'm I'm going to be dabbing my brush, creating little spots. I'm not worried about blending the two colors together. It actually works well if there's some separation because it just looks like flecks. And it's going to add a little bit of dimension to it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use Ceramite White. We're going to mix it with the Runefang Steel in about a 50-50 mixture. And I'm going to do the same process again. I'm going to use my detail brush because I've got to be very careful with this paint. When you mix white, or basically any color into your metallics, you really need to be concerned with the fact that you're basically taking a shiny paint and you're putting matte paint into it. So yes, I am doing a highlight since white is in color brighter than the Runefang Steel. However, in another way, I'm actually taking the shine out of the paint. So in that way, it's a low light. But it's kind of a fun technique to play around with. And you can create different levels of contrast, not necessarily by just changing the color, but also by changing how matte or shiny something is. So I'm also going to use this white mixture to scratch up my metal a little bit. I'm creating some long slashes. I'm also doing some dabbing on the edges to also kind of look like it's been chipped a little bit. I'm doing some small little dots to look like maybe they were deflected bullets. I don't want to go too overboard, but it will give it another dimension and make it match the weathering that we've done on the rest of the tank. Next, we're going to highlight the lower lip of these paint scratches. We're going to start with Evil Sun Scarlet. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of Lamian Medium. And I'm just going to use my detail brush to catch the lower edges of these chips. So this highlight's going to do two things. You know how sometimes when you scratch paint, it actually leaves a brighter color? It's going to look kind of like that. It's also going to look like it's adding a little bit of depth, as if the sun's catching the lower edge of this chip, and the silver paint is actually deeper on the model. It's creating an illusion of depth. And I guess it's actually doing a third thing as well. I'm using the same colors to highlight this lower edge that I used to highlight the edges of the tank and the edges of the scratch marks. And so it's unifying all of those elements with a similar color palette. There's not really a science for where you want to highlight. You just kind of have to eyeball it and go as far as you want. The more highlighting you do, the more cartoony it's going to look, but the more it's going to stand out when you're looking at it on the table. Less of a highlight may be a slightly more realistic look, but it's going to be harder to notice from a distance. For these areas on the top part, there's two options. You can either highlight the entire outer edge, or you can just decide to pick which way down is. And on this particular tank, I've decided that the light is hitting it from the back, so down would be towards the front. So I'm highlighting the edge that's closest to the front. We're going to brighten this highlight one more step using Wild Rider Red. I'm going to be very sparing with this color. Because it's so bright, it will be very easy to overdo it. But even just using a little bit is going to add another dimension, another level of depth to these paint chips, as if they're even deeper. Now, I'm not going to be highlighting the paint chips that are on the black areas of paint because the colors that I would use for that highlight are so similar to the colors of the metallic paint itself, it would be visually confusing. Okay, so these are paint chips. They're not necessarily battle damage, and paint chips don't happen on an area that's not slightly weathered. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some weathering on this tank and the areas where we've dinged up the paint. I'm going to be using Nihilak Oxide, say that 5 times fast. Now, I understand that this is not what this paint was originally intended for. This paint is meant to be a verdigris on copper or bronze. And it's great for that, don't get me wrong. I'm using it here for a couple reasons. One, it's a very milky paint, and it's going to mimic kind of a hard water stain look for me. Also, the colors are going to contrast really well with the reds on this armor, since it has green tints in it, and red and green are complementary. It's also a very translucent paint, which I like because I want it to be tinting everything underneath it, but most of the glazes that GW has right now don't have this milky quality to them. And since I already used white in highlighting the metal, I can't use a watered down white to do this effect of this hard water stain that I'm trying to do. And there's no rule that says that you can't use paints however you want to. So says I. So you can see I'm just catching the very bottom areas that I highlighted. I'm picking a few places where I take the paint and I drag it down. I'm letting it pool in some of the corners of my metals and like under these sections where the water would have run down and pooled and created a hard water stain. And you can see here after it's dry that it just kind of creates a little bit of cohesiveness to the paint chips so that it doesn't look like they existed in a vacuum. I'll give this Predator a twirl so you can see the rest of it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this how-to video, I have another one where I'm going to take you through how to do the lights and lenses on this Predator in the MiniWarGaming Vault in the link down below in the description. If you don't have a Vault membership, go ahead and click the link. You can get a 7-day free trial and get access to my tutorial as well as hundreds of other videos in the MiniWarGaming Vault. So click the link, check out the videos, and happy wargaming.